Hi, everyone. This is Rich Kingsford, and I'm here with Chuck White, and we're continuing our podcast about STEM education and in educating the next generation more intelligently. We have a really tricky topic today: working memory, attention, and overwhelm, especially with our age of calculators and AI doing X% of our thinking for us. Before we jump into it, we are from chemvantage.org, which offers affordable, high quality LTI homework and quizzes and assignment apps for general chemistry. Question one: what are the executive functions and how do deficits in them, specifically working memory and attention control, create a unique barrier for struggling STEM students?
Rich, that is such a deep question. You should be interviewing a psychologist, not a chemist. But, as chemists, as teachers, we have to, at least at the surface level, understand what's going on in the brains of our students so that we can help them to learn chemistry. And so a certain amount of psychology and brain science is required. So let's start. Executive functions. Executive functions are a set of cognitive skills that are necessary for self-control and decision-making and goal-directed behavior. Um, Working memory is a system of our brain that's responsible for holding information temporarily, potentially lots of things together, so that we can put them together and complete complex tasks like reasoning and problem solving. And I think for this podcast, we're going to have a big emphasis on problem solving because that's a big emphasis in at least beginning chemistry, general chemistry. And you mentioned attention control. That's really the ability to focus our concentration and ignore the distractions that are going on around us. So, as I mentioned, a large part of chemistry education and probably STEM education in general is learning how to solve problems, taking a collection of data and information and putting the pieces together in the right order to get the desired answer. In the beginning of this process, it might reduce to, which equation do I use to plug these numbers into? That's sort of an engineering approach to STEM problem solving. But really, as problems become more difficult and advanced, at least in general chemistry, they might include extraneous information that's not useful for solving the problem, or they might omit some required information that could be easily obtained online. So as students get better and better at problem solving, we expect them to be able to recognize when something is useful or when something is missing. So, solving these problems requires the development and practice of working memory and attention control. Unfortunately, our devices, our phones, are pathologically designed to distract us, and they are intentionally designed to divide our attention to multiple tasks. Today's students talk about how good they are at multitasking. Well, I take exception to that, but they think they are. And a long time ago when I was a student, I didn't really even think about multitasking. It wasn't it wasn't something that I needed very much. So, developing the ability to focus is probably the most difficult skill for today's students to learn. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we're in big trouble. I think a lot of people are facing this barrier, a lot of students, and I think it really hinders their ability to solve those problems, which I completely agree with you about. To me, that it's all the STEM is all about the foundation that enables me to solve those problems. But yeah, I'm excited for these questions here because it it's so important, including with the tools, the phones and the AIs. They can solve a lot of problems, but they can't solve the a lot of the human ones. And we are human, and we're trying to figure out this how to survive and how to be productive and how to be happy. And these tools might, it's very possible that they will hinder someone and hurt someone more than they help them in that mission and that objective. Interesting one. I definitely see that barrier that this working memory and attention control and these executive functions being a struggle for current students and future students.
Yeah.
The next question here is how does cognitive overwhelm manifest physically or behaviorally in a student with the executive function challenges? When I say executive function challenges, I think their ability to think, a person's ability to think and focus on one single problem. How does cognitive overwhelm manifest physically or behaviorally in a student with executive function challenges? And what are the signs teachers most often mistake for disinterest or laziness?
Well, I think one of the things that puts teachers at a disadvantage here is that we don't really know what's going on in students' brains. We don't know really if they're disinterested or overwhelmed. But, you look out in a class and a student may appear distracted. They may be looking out the window or looking at the student next to them, um, or they may retreat into their phone, or they may just disengage completely and put their head down on the desk and close their eyes. You just really can't tell. But I know that in watching one of my grandsons, for example, he's very easily distracted, and we sometimes get together and do projects, build uh, toys and kits and things like that together, and he'll be working and reading the instructions and screwing things together. But then if his sister does something, just makes a little noise across the room, he'll stop what he's doing and he'll look over at her and be completely distracted. I have another grandson who's much less easily distracted. So you can sort of get the clues by what they're doing, but whether they're disinterested or lazy, and especially if they're not people who you know well, then you really don't know what's going on in their brain.
I think I'm like your grandson in that, especially when I'm working on something hard, I'm quick to get frustrated and quick to say, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to save this problem for another day." And I'm going to work on something else that's easier to work on. And, I'm an adult, I'm in my 40s, and I've been working professionally for 20 years now, and I still do this. And I think the computer, my Windows computer, exacerbates the problem because I can have so many windows up and I can have so many AIs working on different things now, and the doors are wide open for distraction. So I feel for your grandson, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking that's my take on this. The question asked, what are the signs teachers most often mistake? What are the signs that a student is having a hard time thinking, having a hard time focusing, and maybe being persistent and sticking with a problem? I think my number one sign for me personally is switching to a different problem. But usually that's easier. It's switching to something, a different problem that's more fun to think about or easier to think about is my personal sign.
Well, I'm old school myself, and I use computers a lot, but I'm kind of a one screen, one task person, and
That's good.
I go deep into it, and try not to get distracted very much.
Oh, I really admire that. Moving on, what are the most common classroom activities or assessment formats in STEM that unintentionally punish students with poor in inhibitory, is that the word?
Yeah.
Inhibitory control? What's inhibitory control?
So inhibitory control is an executive function, and it's the ability to suppress inappropriate or automated responses in favor of deliberate goal-directed behavior. So um, I don't really see this very much in classrooms, that students just, go off on a completely different tangent. But I have occasionally had a student who raises their hand at every question. If you pose an open question to the class, there's always one person in the front row who raises their hand all the time. And, most of the time, I assume that this stems from a need from this student to be validated. Um, and, I know that this person probably has the right answer, but they're dominating the class discussion. And so often I will briefly acknowledge that the student probably knows the answer. I'll nod or smile at him or her, or say something like, yeah, I know, Jesse, you probably do have the answer, but I'm going to ask somebody else. And then I'll intentionally ignore that person and call on somebody else, even if the other person is much less confident of the answer, just to prevent the student from dominating the discussion. It doesn't always work, but uh, having that sort of open discussion where you just throw a question out to the class probably encourages a few students who have poor inhibitory control. But I haven't found over my career that it was a huge problem.
Hmm. Interesting. I Tests come to my mind. So I'm thinking that's a big term. Inhibitory control is I'm going to think of it as focus. Can I stay focused on the task at hand? Some students are great, some students are not so great. And I'm think what the answer that comes to my mind about the question, again, it's asking about uh, common scenarios where we unintentionally punish students with limited focus abilities. And tests come to my mind. I'm thinking of the really, really stressful tests like the finals or the ones you take in the testing center for with college students. And I think I've seen this in myself sometimes that it's so stressful and I'm so scared that I it it becomes the distraction and it makes it so I that the fear makes it so I struggle to focus. Now, one of the stressful tests, I think those are healthy. I think those super stressful tests can be healthy and a good thing. I think it depends on what level you're at. And maybe the challenge with classrooms is everyone is at a different level, right? You've got really high performers and you've got people who are really struggling, and they're all in the same class, and that's rough. But I'm trying to think of ways. There must be some way to personalized learning. I've heard about personalized learning tools that help. I want to be challenged as a student, but I don't want to be too challenged. And maybe that's the answer to some of this unintentional punishing is don't punish students. We're not trying to punish anyone. What we're trying to do is help them with a challenge, but not too steep of a challenge.
Yeah, there's a long history in education of whether or not to track students into advanced courses or remedial courses, and to put students with other students at their same level of experience and learning and ability.
Mhm.
And the danger, of course, is that somebody can allow their personal prejudices to influence them by tracking students into levels inappropriately. And
Mm.
that's why, for a very long time, this was strongly discouraged, at least in the public schools. Um, when you mentioned testing, what I thought was if somebody becomes distracted or even overwhelmed, then they might start, just looking around the classroom. And when I'm up at the front proctoring an exam and I see a student, especially in the back, who's looking around the classroom, I get concerned, right? Because I think they may be looking for answers on an adjacent paper. But you learn to recognize that when somebody is intentionally trying to look at another person's paper to get an answer, it looks very different from when they're just overwhelmed and just need to take a little break.
That's really good. Boy, these are tough questions. I wish I was better at all of them. Moving on, what are 2 or 3 simple externalization strategies teachers can use to offload working memory demands?
Wow. This is hard because the the focus that we have on problem solving really does demand that students develop their skills for working memory and attention.
Mhm.
And so there are some things you can do. Um, George Polya is a guy who wrote a book called How to Solve It. This was back in the mid 1950s. And um, before that, and even since then, most people up at least until my age, and I'm in my 70s now, early 70s now, um, learned problem solving strategies just by brute force. We were given problems to solve and we just had to figure it out. And a lot of people developed similar ways of figuring it out. But George Polya was known for actually writing this down and explaining it in a way that people could understand it. And what he taught was a backward system for solving problems. So you would actually start with the desired answer and you would work the problem backwards to the data and information that you were given with the problem. And you would do it in steps. So it's often really difficult to see how to get to the answer from a bunch of data that you have in a problem. But if you start with the answer and you say, and you pose the question, well, what would I need to know in order to calculate that? And then you can probably define some intermediate place, or maybe 2 intermediate places that you need to go before you can get all the way back to something that you know, the information and data that you were given in the problem. So working the problem forward or backward, or sometimes both to meet in the middle, is something that Polya taught in his book. And along with that, he taught how to create a simple graph, a linear graph for this problem solving. So instead of just keeping all of this in your head, you would say, well, okay, I have this information, then I can calculate this next thing, and then I can calculate this other next thing. And then finally, I'll be able to get to the answer to the problem. And so you solve this conceptually and you make a graph, and then using the graph, you can focus on each individual step of the problem separately. And so you can actually shift your working memory from step to step and make the overall problem easier to solve. I try to teach this to my students. I devote usually 1 or sometimes 2 lectures in a course to helping students understand how to do this. Some of them get it, some of them don't. Some of them have to struggle through and figure out problem solving on their own. Some of them never get it. But there are things you can do, like making these linear graphs that can help students to reduce the instantaneous working demands on our working memory.
Yeah. I really love that, and I'm tempted not to add anything onto that because I loved it so much. But I just wanted to emphasize a few key words that I plucked out. Writing it down with, I think our first answer is the first externalization strategy is pencil and paper. Just writing it down. And I think what's so great about it is it's okay if it's messy. It's no one's going to judge you on your scratch notes. And I think you can have notes digitally or on piece of paper. Um, For years, I fantasized about getting rid of the graphing calculators and instead using Python, teaching even kindergartners how to use Python, a very, very simple coding language, um, and how to work with AI to code with Python. In addition to writing it down, I think writing it down with pen and paper, pencil and paper is great. In addition to that, I hope kindergartners begin learning how to solve problems through programming. I loved the backward problem solving idea. That so powerful, so common. Starting with the ideal, starting with the solution, and then working backwards. Beautiful. It's so applicable. And then breaking it down into steps. Pure genius. Moving on. How can the first 5 minutes of class be structured to explicitly prime students' executive functions for the upcoming lesson?
You know, um, this is a really interesting question, and I think the answer is just astonishingly simple. If you simply wrote an outline of the goals for the class for that class session on the board at the beginning, I think you could achieve a lot. One of the things that I think teachers miss is the fact that they know what their goals are for the class, and because they reviewed their notes, for the previous hour before the class, and they wrote it down, and it's all compartmentalized, and so they know exactly where they want to start and where they want to end at 50 minutes later. But the students have no idea. And so if you just start writing on the board, their first question is, well, what are we doing? What is this good for? Where are we going to end up? Why should I pay attention? And if you simply write down a list of maybe three goals for the class on the board, then students can be calibrated. They know what is going to happen during the class, and it gives them context for understanding the very first thing that you write on the board. I think we miss that a lot of times, and we do a disservice to the student, and it's all just a matter of perspective.
Ah, and the answer is, I like how simple the answer is too. I like that. One thought that came to my mind is a joke or something funny, a funny video. I love to start my classes. These were college students, but I would start with a little 30-second to 90-second video of something funny, often from Big Bang Theory or one of my favorite sitcoms. And I liked them because they made people laugh, and I think laughter is really good for your brain, for your memory, for humans, period. I wish I was a better comedian, but I also liked the case studies. I'm a big believer that the there's so many case studies in sitcoms and even in jokes. Dilbert, very common Dilbert comic strips. There's tons and tons of case studies in there, and there's tons of wisdom. And I would never really formally talk about the hints, the lessons in there and the case studies, but I did like to say one line, say one sentence or so about hey, this is funny, but there's also a lesson in here. Uh, I believe you can do the same thing with any STEM topic.
I think telling a joke at the beginning is really good for getting students to relax a little bit and settle in. Um, I I worry a little bit about distracting them from the task at hand, but maybe you could make a joke about intermediate vector bosons before you teach a class uh, in physics, but I don't know.
Something relevant to the goal for the day. Yeah.
Something that might be at least tangentially relevant to the goal. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good challenge. All right. Next one, a couple more. What specific scaffolding techniques, like partially completed notes or graphic organizers could help students with weak attentional control stay on track during problem solving.
Well, um, I, I I honestly don't know. um, I've never tried this, but I imagine that some multi-step problems could be structured in the way that you would write out almost the full solution, but the problem would be complete step 2 of 5 or something like that. To ask them to just um, complete an intermediate step, and that way the student would have to understand the question, and they would have to understand at least the beginning part of the solution, and maybe the end to figure out where they were going, and then supply the thing that's in between. It would help by focusing the attention of the student on one step of the problem. That's something that we talked about just a minute ago with the graph. Um, and I suppose that that could help students with weak attention control. But I confess I've never tried it.
Yeah, it's really tough. I think as teachers, we want to cross that finish line and we want to push harder and harder to help every single student in the class cross the finish line. And I'm thinking maybe that's part of the problem is that drive. We are driven, we are persistent, we are capable, but the student isn't. um, some things I don't know the answer either. This is a really tough one. Scaffolding techniques and man, it's students with weak attentional control. That's a tough one. Some ideas that came to my mind was inviting the student to ask AI for scaffolding techniques. I try. I think I've mentioned this in some earlier episodes. As a teacher, I try not to be the one with all the answers. I don't want to spoon feed any student, even the struggling ones. I want them to spoon feed themselves and to learn how to think. And I think a wonderful tool is AI. I once designed a course, and one of our goals was to help the student use AI tools instead of saying, AI is not allowed in this class. And I caught myself over and over again trying to give too many of the answers. Instead, I tried to design the assignments so that we were encouraging the students to ask AI, how would I approach this problem? What are the steps? How might I break this problem down into small, manageable steps? And maybe ask the AI for some techniques on, hey, AI, I'm having trouble focusing. Could you give me 10 suggestions on how I could better focus? And encouraging, not me doing that with the students, asking the students to do that. I'm also thinking every time we take a step, that's a win. If some problems are so hard that they have a dozen or even multiple dozens, many dozens of steps, and I like to think it's okay to pause and celebrate after you complete just one of those steps. That's a victory. That's a win. Maybe with a break too. I think sometimes when you're trying to solve a multi-step problem, it just gets so tiring. And sometimes I think I and maybe the students need to take more breaks.
Yeah, I think one of the risks that we run with that approach is that um, the more traditional teachers like me tend to be very well focused on, strongly focused on getting the final answer. And if you invite students to ask AI, then there will be a tendency to just simply take the final answer and give that. And that doesn't really accomplish the goal of developing problem solving skills in this case. So I think in order to move to the future where AI is going to be in everyone's pocket, I guess it is right now, um, in order to move there, we as teachers are going to have to ask questions in a different way. that get students to use AI as a tool to to learn and develop skills, but not to encourage them to use it as a crutch to just simply get the answer and give it up.
Love that. Completely agree. Anything else? Any other thoughts on this one? Scaffolding techniques for better
No,
focus?
no,
It's a tough one. I,
it's
and I'm thinking pa some pain is good, some frustration is good. I don't want to spare my students from all frustration. I believe there's a path there, and they've got to walk that path and develop focus.
the more frustration and pain there is, the more joy there is in finally solving the problem.
I like that attitude, yes. And the hope.
Yeah.
Okay, two more. How can teachers introduce wait time or thinking aloud protocols to help students practice their inhibitory control or their focus instead of rushing to the wrong answer?
In my experience at the freshman college level, rushing to the wrong answer is rarely the problem. More often, students are just get stuck. But students do often go down the wrong track. And I see this especially in oral exams in graduate school. So prompting students with simpler questions to check their reasoning is useful. And students learn that, when they're sort of going down a rabbit hole and a teacher says, whoa, whoa, just stop for a second and think about this simpler thing, then they realize, okay, maybe I've just made a mistake and I'm thinking about this incorrectly. So you can design prompts to get students to recognize when they're on the wrong track and just sort of lead them back onto the right track. But at the freshman level, it's not something that I've experienced very often.
Yeah. I'm thinking those in software development, there's frequent tests, there's unit tests, and you check yourself along the way every step. I've heard my kids complain every once in a while about some of those questions that are they build on the last question. So you have to use the answer to the previous question in the next question. And they expressed frustration because they said, it's not fair. If I get the previous question wrong, I get the next question wrong too.
Right.
And I'm thinking that's life. That's
There's
that's
no
ex
partial credit if the missile crashes.
yeah, exactly. I'm thinking it. I want them to think of those risks and strategize and say, okay, I need to be patient, and I need to have a healthy skepticism and acknowledge that maybe I did get this wrong and check myself, slow down. I'm often guilty of trying to go too fast. And when we're solving difficult problems, I have to remind myself to slow it down and smooth, go smooth, not try so hard to go fast, but try to go smooth and try to check myself along the way. And I want my students to try to do that too.
I have students check themselves, especially at the end. And I always encourage them to look at their answer and ask themselves, does that make sense? Does that pass the smell test? Right?
Mm,
Because if their answer is off by a factor of two, well, they probably won't even notice. But often their answer will be off by a factor of 10 million. And if you're off by a factor of 10 million, you really ought to have some intuitive sense that that's just not possible. Um,
I
and
like that.
and so yeah, it's something that students really have to do to check the answer, especially at the end.
I love that. And I think those skills will pay off in their careers too and in their adult futures.
Absolutely.
These are valuable testing skills.
Yep.
One more. What role does structured small group work play? Sorry. What role does structured small group work play in compensating for individual um, EF deficit. And what was EF again? The
Executive function.
like executive functions. Uh,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
I've
Go
often
ahead.
used small group work in classes to allow students to model problem solving strategies for each other. So, what works for me may or may not work for a student. But if they are working with a fellow student, which is a much less risky process for them, then they can ask questions. Well, how did you know that? How did you work that? Um, and as far as working memory is concerned, if three students are applying working memory to a problem, then there's a greater chance that all of the important information can be brought to bear on the problem. One of the students, at least, is going to remember that, oh yeah, we need to know the molar mass of aluminum to figure this out, and they'll go and get that information. So working memory is tough, and if you are missing a piece, often the problem is difficult or impossible to solve. But if you have three people, two or three people working on a problem, somebody's going to have all the right pieces in their head, and so you'll have a greater chance of solving it together.
I love that. And that one person who with more capable in the group, I think becomes a teacher and help. I think they gain an opportunity to build leadership skills and help the other students.
I think peer instruction is very valuable, not only for the student teacher, but all student learner, but also for the student teacher. And most teachers would buy into the idea that there is no better way to learn a subject than to have to teach it to somebody else.
I love that. Completely agree. Yeah, one of the risks, so we're talking about small group work, and I love projects. I love those small groups. There's the one problem. The question asks, how do we manage this? And it can be tricky to manage because project work can be a little chaotic and unpredictable. And I think of the risks that come. And one of the high risks on my list is freeloading. Sometimes even I try to keep my groups really small. Three is my favorite, often because one of the three is sometimes absent. And and then the two can work together. I really prefer two. One-on-one work is my favorite type of meeting. It's nice and manageable, and you still have company, and it's still fun. But sometimes three, I think, works a little better. It's just my personal favorite. But I still worry about freeloading, and one of the students being disengaged, and then the two continuing on hard at work. What's been your experience with team sizes and freeloading?
Well, I like twos and threes also. Um, I I try to avoid a situation where um, three struggling students are in a group together, because if they all get overwhelmed, then nothing happens. So if you can do it, it's important to have a good mix of more capable and less capable students in each group. Um, there are definitely cases where students freeload, and there's very little that we can do about that. I mean, you just can't micromanage every single group in a class. But I think the downside of freeloading in that low stakes environment are not too bad, and so I'm willing to tolerate some freeloading, and I think the benefits to the students who are actually working together outweigh the risks of freeloading.
Yeah, I really like that. One more question I wanted to touch a little bit more on is our one of our favorite topics, AI. And my question is, will AI obviate the need to focus? And will AI obviate the need for a strong working memory? Let's think, 5, 10 years in the future.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Um, Well, it's certainly true that AI has access to an incredibly broad field of information. And we're at the stage now that the large models can solve very tough problems. In fact, I would go as far as to say that an AI can probably solve any problem for which there is a known solution. Um, and I think it's less clear that AI can solve problems for which there is no known solution, because really they're trained on data sets which were developed by humans. And so I think what that really points to is that uh, humans will be asked to be creative and in ways that AI is incapable. And so a lot of the routine things and solving, general chemistry problems is really a routine thing. That will be left to AI. Just as we don't do long division anymore, we use calculators. Um, uh, we will utilize AI to solve routine problems. Where humans come in, I think, is going to be in the creative process. And so it will be up to us to change the way that we educate students in order to spark their curiosity and to encourage their creativity.
Uh, I completely agree. I heard someone say there's human problems and computer problems. And the computers are really good at solving computer problems, but it's not so good at the more human problems. And I think we'll need that creativity to solve the more human problems.
After, I I said that, but I also recognize that at some fundamental level, our brains are just a bunch of neurons that are connected to each other with electrical connections, and they are really a biological computer. And so, what makes humans any more capable of being creative than an electronic machine? I don't know the answer.
Yeah, yeah, it's tough to predict the future. I'm thinking 5, 10 years in the future about our focus abilities and our working memory abilities, and I love the calculator uh, analogy. Calculators, we're not doing long division. We don't need to do long division. We can just type it into a calculator. Well, maybe in the future there are some problems that the routine problems or problems that AI is really, really good at that we'll just kind of will lose interest in. But I think there's another set of problems and a new set of problems. Those human problems will emerge that AI can't crack yet. Uh, the other day we were talking about equality problems and the wage gap is a good example. Um, I'm thinking when I think about the future in AI, and I think AI is really, really powerful. And once robots come and are ubiquitous, and everyone has a humanoid robot in their house, it's going to get even more interesting. I believe, or I'm imagining two separate camps of people, unambitious versus ambitious. And I'm thinking unambitious people might be able to relax and maybe let the robots take care of them. And their ability to think will they'll struggle. They'll struggle to think. And it's like your brain is a muscle. As you don't think so hard and as you rely more and more on AI, your brain will be weakened. But I think the opposite is true for ambitious people. I think there is a natural reward, and it can be fun to think, and it can be fun to solve problems. I love logic puzzle games, and I don't play them because I my boss requires me to. I play them for fun, and I think there's AI will open up a whole new door of those problems to be solved, a whole new door of adventure, more doors of new and exciting problems that ambitious people will think they'll be even better at focusing, and their working memories will be even stronger because they're using AI as a tool to help them think more clearly and help them think faster and help them solve more challenging problems than the last decade.
Well, I hope when the AI robots become completely autonomous, that they believe that humans are still useful to have around,
Me
because it
too.
wouldn't take very much to wipe us out.
Yep. I share that hope. Well, thank you, Chuck. This was a really fun topic.
Yeah, thank you. It's a tough topic.
It is a tough one. Chuck and I are from camvantage.org, and this service is all about questions, high quality curricula. And we offer that homework in LTI compatible platforms like Canvas and Blackboard and all the learning management systems that are popular today, all focused on general chemistry. Thanks for listening.